Congresswoman Madeleine Dean of Pennsylvania, a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and retired Lieutenant General Mark Hertling. He's the author of If I Don't Return, Father's Wartime Journal. Thank you both to both of you guys for joining us this morning. We really appreciate it. Congresswoman, I want to start with you and see if you have gotten, you're obviously on recess, so I imagine briefings, at least classified ones, have been put on hold right now. But have you heard anything from Foreign Affairs Committee staffers about the status update of this missing service member? And if you could just sort of pull back for a sec, what your take is on and your assessment is on Iran's missile capabilities at this point, and if the reality of that matches the rhetoric that we're hearing from the president.
Well, it's good to be with all of you this Passover and Easter weekend. I have to tell you, I'm struck by the reporting and the beautiful line from the child at Dilley, Texas. I pray you don't forget us. I happen to have been in Dilley, Texas with Joaquin Castro and other members. We met terrified children there who were being medically neglected at that for-profit prison. So I'm very touched by that, and I'm prayerful that this country stops these detention centers. I also went this week to Philadelphia, a federal prison that is also being used by ICE, where we saw 52 immigrants. So forgive me for not talking immediately about Iran. On Iran and about foreign affairs, we have not gotten an update. I am relying upon all of you and the reporting that you have. I depend upon and count on the excellence of our military, but I decry what the president did this week in his speech before the nation, in the way he bloviated and bragged about the destruction of Iran's ability to compete in this war. To me, it seemed like he was just going to incite such an attack on our military. So I pray for the safe return of the other pilot of the F-15. And I pray for a swift end to this war that is a war of the president's making. This president is going to be known for rubble, from the East Wing to the Middle East, and people buried in the rubble. If you take a look at the reporting in Tehran and the civilians there, a couple thousand are already dead as a result of this war, and others are just huddling in a 10 million person city trying to avoid the rubble.
General, the president of the United States, when he talks about this war, he, in one breath, says we're winning big. The Pentagon has said that 90% of Iran's missile capabilities is degraded. But now we have a down jet, a service member lost somewhere in the mountains of Iran, troops surging from here to the Middle East, no end in date. No end in sight. How do you square all of this as someone who has, launched these kinds of plans that the Department of Defense or a president has wanted?
Yeah, Eugene, launched and executed some of them. And what I'll say is there's a couple of things that don't fit for me. I mean, I think you hit right on the issue. Number one, we haven't obliterated Iran's capability. That's ridiculous to say. My combat experience has told me in Iraq that whenever we thought we had obliterated or damaged or destroyed arms caches all over a country that's 3 times smaller than Iran in Iraq, we didn't. We'd always find more arms caches. We'd find more launchers that we didn't anticipate. You just can't say from 10,000 feet when you're conducting kinetic strikes with airborne platforms and with Tomahawks that you're getting everything that's on the ground, because your intelligence elements can't figure that out completely. They can't figure out where the hard and deeply buried caches and launchers exist. And, what we saw yesterday is 2 airplanes shot at. One that was knocked out of the sky, and God bless the pilot we haven't found yet, or the crew member we haven't found yet. But the other one, the A-10 that landed, was also hit. You also had 2 helicopters that were part of something called a CSAR mission, Combat Search and Rescue, CSAR. That's what they were doing, because the military never leaves a fallen comrade. When you know someone's in harm's way, you do everything. You move mountains to try and find that individual, get them back to safety. So so all of those things don't comport with me in terms of what's actually happening. And for the president to say he hopes we're going to find this other crew member and he's not going to comment on what we're going to do if we don't, to me, for a commander-in-chief to say that would be as if I was a division commander in the area, like I had been in Iraq, and said, gee, I sure hope we find those missing soldiers. No. We're pulling out all stops to find them. And that's the criticality of this moment. Whenever you lose, especially an F-15 pilot. And the very fact that 2 airplanes were shot down is an indicator that we haven't obliterated all of their capabilities. And the fact that two helicopters were also shot at, there's a lot of open source intelligence on that, tells me that the Iranian people are not real willing to have the kinds of things going on in their country that we're doing to them.
Mm-hmm. Congresswoman, the incompetence of the civilian leadership to articulate what exactly is happening has been astounding these last 5 weeks, which makes me wonder why on earth the Secretary of Defense has decided to fire the Army Chief of Staff. I'm going to put this story up from the New York Times from Thursday. Where it says senior Army officers reacted with anger and frustration to the news of General Randy George's dismissal, characterizing it as the latest blow to a service that already feels under siege by Mr. Hegseth. Again, the Army General Randy George was the Army Chief of Staff. And while we're at it, let's put up all the other military leaders who have been forced out under the Trump administration since it's been back in power. What does it say about the leadership, the civilian leadership of the Pentagon, that the Secretary of Defense thought it necessary to fire the Army Chief of Staff in the middle of a war?
I'm so glad to have the benefit of listening to the general. How I wish this administration would listen to the experience of somebody like the general who's on with us. What it says to me is the Secretary of Defense is ignorant of the excellence that surrounds him. And I guess he's a little intimidated by it. It is staggering that he would be so thin-skinned as to get rid of the Army Chief of Staff at this moment of conflict of their own making, without the approval of Congress, without the approval of the American people. You see the polls. The American people don't want this war that is only making life harder here in America, with gas prices up, the price of diesel fuel up there, therefore the price of every good we buy. It just shows you how thin-skinned and inept he is. He is not fit for this purpose. I have called him Christy Hegseth because of the vanity that he displays. So I have a feeling he may be among those who are replaced. But what the problem is when the president replaces one incompetent, inept person, he doesn't look for somebody better, somebody more professional. He looks for somebody who will carry his water. And his water is quite dysfunctional and incoherent.
General, President Trump said this week, amongst a laundry list of other statements about the war, that he felt like objectives would shortly be met after Iran was bombed back to the Stone Ages. Actually, let's listen to him say it, and then I'll ask you about it on the other side.
We are on track to complete all of America's military objectives shortly, very shortly. We're going to hit them extremely hard over the next 2 to 3 weeks. We're going to bring them back to the Stone Ages where they belong.
What even are the objectives here? Because that's something that we still haven't heard from the president. And if he was to bomb Iran back to the Stone Ages and then decide sort of unilaterally that the war was open, what would that mean for the state of the region?
I'll state the objectives first, Jackie. He said them last Wednesday night a little bit more clearly than he has over the last several weeks. He said we were going to destroy the Iranian Navy, we were going to destroy the Iranian Air Force and all their ballistic missile launch capabilities and make us safe. I'm paraphrasing the things he said. That's the first time the president has said something beyond what he said initially. When you say something like bombing people back to the Stone Age, I find that despicable. You fight wars for political objectives. You don't make swaggering statements like that, or at least I wouldn't want my commander-in-chief doing that. If I can, though, can I shift a little bit and comment more on the retirement of General George?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'd like to do that because General George, as the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, is well loved by soldiers across the board. He's created a culture that's very good within the U.S. Army. But he's not the only one that was reported in that statement by the New York Times yesterday. It's not only General Randy George, Chief of Staff of the Air Force, it's also General Dave Hodney, a four-star general, one of the few that are in the Army, who's in charge of Army Futures Command. And here's one that hit personally for me, which I don't know how to connect the dots on this, but the third officer mentioned was Major General Bill Green. Bill Green is the chief of chaplains in the Army. And what that means is he oversees all the moral capabilities of the chaplains in the force. And I know Bill Green. He was one of my chaplains when I was a brigade commander, and he is one of the finest officers and ministers in the Army. And that's why he was chosen as the chief of chaplains. When you have those three individuals, it tells me more of what's going on. There's all kinds of conclusions on why George was fired, but when you talk about all three of them together, it's much more damaging, and there's a whole lot more to this story. They were standing up for something. I don't know what the issue was, but when you hear Secretary Hegseth say that soldiers are fighting for Jesus, which is what he said in a speech the other day, that just chills me to the bone, especially when you have soldiers and all military personnel who are of other faiths, and it's on Passover weekend. It just doesn't make sense to me, and it's just despicable.
Ooh,
and you heard the Pope's comments about that. I so appreciate you saying that. You heard the Pope's comments about that on this Easter and Passover weekend.
Congresswoman Madeleine Dean and Lieutenant General Mark Herdling. Just to be clear, Randy George is the now former Chief of Staff of the Army. Just want to clear that up for folks who might have been confused. Thank you both, as always, for coming to the weekend.